everybody. It's Dave Spector here in Chicago. Welcome to a Shelter-in-Place podcast Zoom interview, Blues from the Inside In. And so excited to have my friend Jorma Kaukonen as our guest. Hey, Jorma.
Hey, Dave. How are you?
Oh, all things considered, I can't complain. How are you? How are things at Fur Peace Ranch?
Well, I could say pretty much the same thing. We've obviously been closed. We're a public facility. That's not happening, but we've been doing our free Saturday night quarantine concerts, and yeah, we're hanging in there. We're hanging in there.
Yeah, those concerts are great. I've watched a couple of them. For those of you who aren't hip to them, they're on YouTube on the Fur Peace Ranch YouTube page. And you've been doing, what, 7 or 8 of them so far?
We've got the 8th one coming up day after tomorrow, or whenever on Saturdays. They're Saturday things.
Yeah, I really enjoy them. You tell great stories, you answer questions, you play acoustic, electric. It's weird. I've done some streaming shows, and it just, how do you adjust to not having an audience?
Wow, that's a really, the answer is, you've done it, so you do adjust. But I'll tell you something funny, because we've done a bunch of them now, because we do tape them, whatever they call recording these days, and play them later on. But the show is live the first time it's on. And so in a way, I've convinced myself I can feel the people out there. Well, we had a glitch a couple of weeks ago where we wound up going live, but I thought I was going to have to just tape it and do it. And that was weird. I couldn't see people anyway, but I knew they weren't there. It was weird. So I don't know. I've convinced myself there's people out there.
Yeah. What's the situation in Ohio with things reopening at all? Restaurants, bars, venues?
Right. Well, I got my first, probably doesn't look great, but I got my first haircut in 2 months the other day. And things are slow. I don't think restaurants are open yet. I live out in the country on a piece of land, and so in a way, I don't go into town much anyway when I'm not working. But I guess we'll just have to see. I actually went to our local guitar store the other day to get an auto harp tuned, if you can imagine that. I want to do something with an auto harp on my little show, and I've played for years. And I looked at this thing and I said, I'm not tuning this thing myself. I'm taking it to the shop. And anyway, and the guys and gals that work there, they were all sitting around doing the same stuff they always do, but they were wearing masks. It was kind of cool, actually.
Yeah. When I think of auto harp, growing up in Chicago, my older brother and sister used to go to folk clubs.
Sure.
I think of Brian Bowers. Does that name ring a bell?
Wow, that's going back some in history, I think.
Yeah.
So here's the auto harp. Here you go. Ding. There I am, just strumming away. I told the guys at the shop the other day, I said in the beginning, when I first started doing what I do, that the whole folk thing was going on. And so we were all folkies on some level. So I didn't have a 12-string, but I had a 6-string guitar, an auto harp, and I actually played harmonica in a rack. You probably won't see. I'm not going to be doing that on the show.
Hey, man, I can picture that. I love seeing you play your old Gibsons, your J50s.
Man, that's a great sounding old guitar. I tell you. The other thing too, and I know you'll appreciate this, is on our first show 7 shows ago, I plugged in a guitar. I plugged in an acoustic guitar, but with the room empty and just a great sounding room and the condenser mics and stuff, all those guitars are cool. I'm not plug any of those guitars in. They sound great. And you and I both know you can't do that in the real world, really.
Yeah, well, that's the way they should sound. That's cool. I want to talk gear with you a little later.
Sure.
So I'm on the north side of Chicago, and I'm actually walking distance to, when I was growing up, it was called the Rainbow Ice Rink. But before it was the Rainbow Ice Rink, back in the late 60s, it was the Kinetic Playground.
Oh, the Kinetic Playground.
Yeah, and the Electric Theater. I think they changed names. Yeah. And I did a little research and talked to some older friends, and I know you played there.
Sure.
Do you remember the room? Do you remember the scene?
Very so distantly. The answer is not really, but I remember the name.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. What about any other early memories? I have a question specifically about a show you did at the Aragon, but when you think of Chicago back in the day, Does anything stand out?
Sure. It's really funny because we've done a lot of shows in Chicago over the decades, but I think the one that just really sits in my memory all these years later is when we first got together, before Grace was in the band, when Signy's in the band, we did 2 weeks at Mother Blues on
Wow.
State Street. And, back in those days, the bar, there were like blues bars and stuff like that. I mean, it was a different era. I'm not, just a different era. And to me, to go to Chicago and be that close to the blues that was so important to me growing
Yeah.
up, that was just magical. I mean, just being there on those streets and I remember I saw Otis Rush play. He was playing up the street from us, and went in and talked to him. And I remember he was just a massive guy. It's funny how memory is. In my memory, he was like a giant. I mean, who knows how tall he really was? But I
Yeah.
remember that the day that I saw him, he was playing a wound third and bending it like it was a 15 unwound.
Wow. Was it a Strat or an Epiphone Riviera? Do you remember?
I think it was an Epiphone Riviera.
Yeah. So that was mid 60s probably?
That would have probably been either late 65 or very early 66.
Okay. So I didn't realize the Airplane existed before Grace.
Yeah, we had our first show was August Friday the 13th of 65, and our first singer, the first Airplane album is really a folk rock album, and the gal that was singing with us then, Signe Anderson, was a great singer, but she wasn't a blues singer. She was a folk singer. And so,
Yeah.
and she was with us, I guess Grace came in late 66 or early 67.
Got it. Excuse, I didn't mean to insult all you hardcore Airplane fans out there listening, but I grew up.
It's a geeky world.
Yeah, I hear you. But I have a friend who's a great artist in Chicago. His name's Zerbal, and I think he was at this show. And his question is, maybe you remember, in late 72, Hot Tuna played the Aragon with Papa John Creech.
Sure.
And Howlin' Wolf opened up the show. And Eddie Shaw was in his band. And I was wondering if you remember, if my friend Zerbal was remembering, I am too, if you remember the show and if you got to meet Wolf and talk to him.
Yeah. I didn't get to meet, obviously, Wolf was another one of the giants of my, one of the masters in our lexicon of mastery. And I remember at that show, of course, it was just such an honor to be playing with a guy like that.
Yeah.
But we didn't really interface then. But in late 65, rather, when we were sort of like part owners of the Matrix, this little sort of folky bar that we started out in, we had a lot of really great artists there. One of the artists that came was Wolf that played, and I did talk with him then. I remember he was an imposing, intimidating individual, and I and the other thing too is like, for guys like us, guys and gals like us, we were so new in the game. We hadn't really picked up on a lot of the showmanship stuff like Buddy Guy did when we saw him a little bit later on, stuff like that. I remember Wolf was playing, and I remember he took the microphone and dropped it down behind the belt in his pants and pulled it out through his fly and swung it around.
Yeah,
I remember that.
Yeah, I've seen pictures, still photos where he's got the mic in his crotch position,
Awesome. That's showmanship.
Yeah.
Yeah, but Wolf, I mean, such a giant, and if I can just quickly blunder in there for a sec, and in that same thing, the Airplane, again with Signe, it was pre-Grace, we played up in Vancouver, BC, again, either late 65 or early 66, and we did the show, and B.B. King opened for us, and I remember thinking, what's wrong with this picture?
Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah. I imagine going on stage after BB must have been
it was,
humbling.
But again, BB, Wolf was intimidating. But Wolf was Wolf. BB was a gracious gentleman.
Yep. Yeah. I only got to meet him once, but he treated everybody with respect, even if
absolutely. Totally.
Yeah. What about, I want to get to some of the Fillmore memories, but
Sure.
I know BB and Albert were regulars at the Fillmore, and I know you guys did a lot of, I've seen posters with the Airplane and Otis Rush. Were
Sure.
you guys ever on any co-bills back then with BB and Albert?
We did, something, I can't remember being on a bill with Albert, but we, over the years, again, the memory that pops up with me with BB is we did a show at Tanglewood up in Massachusetts. And it was
Uh-huh.
BB, The Who, and us.
Wow.
I remember that show. But I remember seeing a show at the, I forget, it wasn't the Fillmore on Fillmore Street. It's either the Fillmore West or the Carousel Ballroom. I forget. It's a building that's like a carpet place down on Market Street now. And it was Freddie King, BB King, Albert King. The three kings,
On the same bill?
as I recall.
Oh my God. And you went?
Oh, absolutely.
Oh man.
Yeah, we weren't on that bill, but I was there.
Yeah. I was wondering if you could share the story you told me in Chicago when we were at Delmark together doing my record. You told me about, I think it was the first time you heard Clapton with Cream at the Fillmore.
Yeah. Well,
And,
yeah. So I used to live not, now that was the Fillmore, that was the real Fillmore on Fillmore. And I used to live not far from there. And I remember I had already gotten the Fresh Cream record and checked it out, and they came to town. So of course we had to go. And of course, back in those days, everybody dropped acid before we went. And so, and when we got there, I remember thinking, I mean, it changed my life in a lot of ways. I really love his work in Cream. And I thought he was like 20 feet tall when I actually met him. He's not 20 feet tall, but man, what an experience. And so in my memory, the version of Sunshine of Your Love that I heard live, that's the one that I remember here, not the recorded version.
yeah.
Yeah, it was awesome, man.
Wow. And you told me that you were so blown away that you went home and you took out
Oh,
your
yeah.
guitar.
Right. I still have it right. I almost forgot about that. Thanks for reminding me. I used to play Rickenbacker 12 string on a couple songs of the Airplane. After seeing Cream, I remember I went back to my apartment and took this thing and threw it through the wall like a spear. I'm
Oh,
never
man.
playing this thing again. That was the bad news. The good news was I didn't break it and I could sell it and get another 345.
So do you remember when you saw Clapton? I know you were tripping, but was
Yeah.
he in SGs then, 345s?
He was playing an SG
Yeah.
that night. Yeah. I mean, and just, I mean, again, you see interviews with him and he doesn't really talk about Cream much, but the way they translated, the traditional American blues, not just the electric blues, but stuff they picked up off of, old 78s and stuff like that. I can't think of another band that's done it better.
Yeah. Yeah. I wish I could have seen them.
Yeah.
I mean, the first power trio, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Like I said, it was a game changer for me. It was a game changer.
Right. And speaking of 345s, your ES 345 that you started playing that in the mid 60s. I know it's a mid 60s model, correct?
Right. Well, the one I had was the first was a 64. So, so when the Airplane got together, the first 6-string electric guitar that I played with him was a 1937 L5, blonde, all maple, stunningly beautiful with a DeArmond pickup on it. And it's not the right guitar for something like that. So then I'd seen the Love and Spoonful. So I got one of those Guild Thunderbirds like Zolyanovsky played. It looks like Mr. Tooth Decay or something. He's got a stand built in the back of it. And so I had played that for a while. And then when I met Bloomfield, he sort of lovingly made fun of that guitar. And it had one bad thing. It had these two switch, instead of having a toggle switch like most guitars have, it had two on-off switches for the pickups. And if you flapped your hand like that, you'd shut both the things off and the guitar would shut off. So I traded that in on the 345, the 64 345. And I remember I bought it on time. It's the first time I'd ever made a time payment on anything. So the first Gibson electric that wasn't the L5 was a 345.
And do you still have it?
Oh man, I wish. No, that's long gone. I gave it to a friend of mine and it got stolen. And I'd
Oh.
had a number of them since then. But when we got the Lifetime Grammy Achievement Award, Mike Volz down at the custom shop and Gibson Custom Shop in Memphis,
Mhm.
they made me an exact replica of a
Wow.
64 ES345, including the retro wiring and all that stuff. And it's lightly distressed. And when I got this guitar and I held it, it felt like the original. I'm not kidding. It's like, I can't believe this.
Wow.
So I have that guitar. Obviously, all the old ones are gone.
Is that a stereo model?
That is a stereo. When I first got the guitar, we did a jumper cable. So I jumped it together. It was just like a regular one. But then I realized that why do that when I could have 2 amps? So 1 amp was for each pickup. So as the airplane sound developed, I had my bridge pickup through the wah was through 1 twin. And then I had a Maestro fuzz tone on the neck pickup and later an Ampeg scrambler. Of course, as we escalated, I then had 2 twins for each pickup.
Wow. For each pickup. Yeah. Stereo guitars. What
a trip indeed.
And I think when I asked you about sessions with the airplane, were you also using twins mostly in the studio?
When actually, interestingly enough, I did use a twin. I started using a twin when we did Surrealistic Pillow. When we did the first Takes Off album, I had like a mid-50s Princeton that I wish I still had, of course. But then, along with the Guild Thunderbird, Zal and the guys in the Love and Spoonful were playing through Standell Super Imperials, 215s, solid state. It was a huge amp. It was like almost as tall as me. And so I got one of those also. For the Surrealistic Pillow sessions, I used a twin. I use my Princeton, but the sound of the electric guitar on Somebody to Love and White Rabbit is not a tube amp. It's that transistor Super Imperial. And the thing that really makes it work, G. Smith told me this, I could have never told you why it did what it did. He said, yeah, you're overdriving the spring reverb. Whatever it was, that solo sound for Somebody to Love and White Rabbit, that's a transistorized amp with 215 speakers. I mean, neither you or I would pick an amp like that under any circumstances for a gig today.
Yeah, but didn't Wes Montgomery use Standells? I think he might have.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know much about Standells, but I believe Wes played one. I'm not sure if he played a giant one, but I've seen photos.
Yeah. Well, I did a show with John Sebastian, and it was one of these shows we just hung out. We played songs and talked on stage and stuff. And I told him that story, and he goes, "We hated those amps. We just used them because they endorsed us." And I went, "Well, it worked out okay for me."
Yeah. I just saw recently an old Muddy Waters ad with his full band. It's a Guild ad, and they were all endorsing Guilds at the time.
Right.
He's playing that solid body that he played on Electric Mud.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Since we're having this conversation, I was horrified by that Electric Mud album.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, at the time, maybe going back after the fact, there might be some endearing qualities to it, but
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree, but it did have one of the greatest photos ever when you'd opened up the album, Muddy in the white robe.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hey,
yeah, the Guild. Yeah, those are the days when instrument companies like gave you stuff for endorsements. I remember one time I had every Vox amplifier made, including the Super Beetle, and a whole bunch of those weird Vox guitars. And there was a time when we had all the Fender stuff too. I used to have the Denim and the Paisley Telecaster. Wish I had those back again.
Wow, a Denim Telecaster? I don't know if I've seen one.
Yeah, it wasn't actually denim cloth like a country guy would have done, but it was like printed on it or something like that.
Wow, that's crazy. I'm gonna have to look that up. I read. Let me just grab it for a second because I want to talk about your.
Oh yeah, is that the soft cover?
I just ordered it from Fur Peace Ranch.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah. I highly recommend this, people. Been so long. Just came out in paperback.
It's got a happy ending.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you about a couple other people that were pretty instrumental. You already mentioned Bloomfield, but I didn't realize you went to the same college as John Hammond.
Sure. Yeah.
And was he the first guy to turn you on to Robert Johnson and a lot of country blues?
Yeah, he sure was. John was a year behind me at school, and I was just starting out learning how to fingerstyle play the guitar. I was learning some Davis stuff. You know, John is one of those amazing stories because neither one of us could really play when I first met him. We were just both starting out, and he brought the records. The Robert Johnson record had not been released yet. He had tapes from his dad, and
Wow.
he played it, and I was just so over my head at the time, you know. I mean, like, for example, I didn't realize at the time that was the Robert Johnson. That's the seventh chord. I had no idea about any of that kind of stuff. But, you know, John Hammond, within 6 months to a year, he'd become the John Hammond we know. I mean, that's unbelievable.
Wow. And he was like, what, 19? Or
If that, yeah, 19, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
And of course, he had that voice also. But yeah, I remember listening to those Robert Johnson things, and I loved it, of course. But I went, "Oh, I'll never get that," and I never did. But he did.
Wow. Yeah, I love him. I imagine he's played Fur Peace at least a few times.
Yeah, he's played a bunch, and we actually just canceled the show because of the virus, because we're not doing shows now. But he'll be back at our place next year. Now, John is awesome. You know, like I said, we're just really, we've known each other for over 60 years.
Wow.
And of all the guys my age, I think he might have the best head of hair too.
Oh yeah, that perfect pompadour, man.
Yeah.
So talk about some of the, you know, you mentioned Gary Davis. What were some of the other really early influences and inspirations in your guitar playing?
Well, I think that when I really started to be influenced, when I was actually learning things, it would be Gary Davis, the 8 Brownie McGhee songs on that Folkways 10-inch album that he did, the 10-inch LP, just him, not Sonny Terry. Listened to a lot of John Lee Hooker, of course, Lightning Hopkins. You know, it's hard to say. I'm going to say they influenced me in a profound way, but not specifically in style, because I never really learned to get that stuff. But I mean, they're just certain things like that sound that Lightning used to get with that DeArmond pickup on his whatever he was playing through a Fender, who knows what it was, some kind of amp and stuff, and a little bit of tremolo, you know. I mean, I think all the stuff over the years has definitely seeped into my soul and not made me afraid to mess with stuff electrically. Reverend Davis, a lot of his stuff when I first started out was really over my head, you know. And I know guys that have showed me, yeah, this is what he really did. And so I kind of get it now. But there's no question that I think as an overall musician, not just a guitar player, the way he looked at chords and phrasing and stuff like that has been a powerful influence over me.
Yeah.
The other thing is that, and I'm sad to say that he passed away a long time ago, but Ian Buchanan, the guy who actually physically took me under his wing, he's got his widow has a website called Winding Boy Blues. There's a bunch of Ian stuff. I mean, he was just, especially in that era, you know, there's lots of really, really great guitar players out there today. But back in those days, it was a rarity, especially amongst white college kids, you know.
Yeah.
It just was. I mean, that's just the deal. And you know, I don't play like Ian because, again, his muse was Lonnie Johnson, and more of the jazzy stuff. And Lonnie, of course, was way over my head. But for some reason, the stuff he showed me was just accessible and opened the door to a lot of things. You know, again, you know, when I think about you know, Reverend Davis, you know, where he goes, death don't have no mercy. He does this thing, well, death don't have no mercy in this land. You know, he does a double dominant shift there. I knew he did something, but I didn't know what it was. So I didn't play it then, and I still don't, but I know it's there now.
So Ian Buchanan, Jorma?
Ian Buchanan, yeah.
right. And
you gotta check out some of his stuff if you can sometime.
how old were you when you met him?
I was 20 when I met him.
Okay.
Yeah, because I was a year old. I'm a year older than Hammond. Yeah, I was 20 when I met him.
Wow.
Yeah.
And he really took you under his wing and mentored you.
Yeah, and you know you know, none of the guys. Actually, one of our roommates is still alive, but he's not a guitar player, so we can't have this conversation because he doesn't play guitar. But we got stuck in an off-campus house, and there was a bunch of folky guys thrashing away, and I believe to this day that in the beginning that Ian took me under his wing because my playing irritated me so much. He had to, he had to make me play more desirable music, and he certainly did. There's no question about it.
That's great. So when I was at Fur Peace back, when was it? Probably in the spring, I think.
Spring, I think, yeah.
Yeah, I remember when you showed me around the Silodelic Gallery.
Yes.
I was struck walking up the stairs by a beautiful photograph of Mike Bloomfield,
Sure.
and I know he was a friend and
Yeah.
and an inspiration, I'm sure. And I know some of those early shows the Airplane did with Butterfield
Sure.
must be something else. Can you talk about first meeting him and
Sure. Well, before when Mike and Butter came to town, they just released East West, which in my opinion is a really seminal American album. It's a really important album. But anyway, and so I already owned the album. I'd listened to the album, but I never met it. I didn't know any of the guys yet. And so I imagine, I don't even know how this happened. It could have been something Bill Graham did, but Mike needed a place to stay. And we used to couch surf with people all over the place back in those days because nobody had any money. And so Mike and his wife came over and spent some time at our place. I had a little apartment. They had dinner and this and that. And, you know, we just hit it off. Now, it's really amazing how such a short intersection in time can have such a profound influence because I was such a novice electric guitar player at the time, and he showed me a bunch of stuff that he was doing. You know, back in those days, they didn't have all the fancy string gauges like we have today.
yeah.
And so I remember he had a sort of a light-ish set on the first three and heavy ones at the bottom. And when he was bending strings back in those days, like if he was going to bend a third string, he put all three fingers on the string and
Really?
you have a lot of control. I don't know if he did it all the time, but I do it a lot depending what string I'm on and how I'm playing, because it really gives you a lot of control with heavier strings to be able to be pitch specific.
Wow.
You know? And he also, you know, back in these days, I had no idea because, you know, pedals didn't exist. And I didn't realize that by turning the amp up real loud, you could get that sustain that we all take for granted today. But he showed me about that also.
Yeah. Do you remember what kind of amp he was using back then?
Twin.
And was he playing?
I'm my complete brain fart here. Elvin Bishop, the other Elvin. Yeah, they were both playing through Twins back then.
Cool. And was Mike playing his white Telly?
No, Mike was playing a Les Paul then. It wasn't a white Telly, although I've played that Telly because Dan Erlewine had it. He was doing some restoration work on it. He's playing a Les Paul, and I remember one of the reasons that I talked about moving away from that Guild Thunderbird, the Airplane and Butter did a show, I think it was at Stanford University or something like that, and Mike was doing some kind of a feedback-ish thing, and he hit the neck of his guitar against the amp and snapped the peg head off. And so I lent him the Thunderbird for the rest of the set, and he was not wild about it, but guess what? He sounded just like himself, you know?
Yeah.
You're right. It was after that I got rid of it and got the 345.
Yeah, I did. I never knew Mike. My older brother saw him in Mill Valley in San Francisco quite a bit, but I heard back in the day he was a rather opinionated fellow.
Yeah, he was always pretty. I love, and I didn't, you know, this is just a story, and it may or may not be true because I didn't hear it, but it's so totally Mike. I heard the story that somebody, some kid went up to him and said, Mr. Bloomfield, I really love your playing. I'm like, well, that's really great. Who else do you like? And he said, well, I like the Doors. And Mike is purported to have said, well, the Doors suck. And if you like the Doors, you suck too.
Oh man.
And again, we sort of spent some time on that Butterfield tour. Like we did a bunch of gigs at the Fillmore. And then after that, I saw him around, but we never really hung again. But but it influenced me a great deal. It really did.
Yeah, I bet. I bet. I want to just go back to Lightning Hopkins because I also saw a poster, a Fillmore poster with the Airplane and Lightning Hopkins on it. Do you remember that?
Sure. And again, we did a bunch of shows with Lightning, but here's what I really remember. Lightning was he had that sound, that vocal sound, and he was just so cool. And he was badass too. So Light came and played, he played The Matrix, and he wanted a bass player. So Jack played with him. I think back in those days, we would go into a club and play for a week. It wasn't like you do a show and you leave, So Jack backed Lightning up. So Lightning, he's so eccentric with his chord changes and stuff, you got to be sharp. But Jack is really sharp. So Lightning liked Jack, and I was there for this. And he told him, you got to cut this rock and roll shit out. Come with me. I'm a musician.
Yeah, I can hear that. That makes sense. Yeah, I wanted to ask you, like back in the Fillmore days, or when you were on tour with Butterfield, was there much jamming on the shows together with like you sitting in with people or other cats sitting in with the Airplane?
I don't remember a lot of jamming back then because what they were doing was so technically over what I was able to do. But we did some jamming later on and stuff. And I remember one time the Airplane was doing I don't remember if it was a publicity thing or as a record release. It's some theater that RCA, back when record companies used to like actually do things for band and then charge them back for whatever it cost. I don't get me started on that. But anyway, and it was Larry Coryell and Mike Bloomfield showed up at the show, and the three of us did jam. I had a Telecaster back then. Mike played that. I was playing the 345 most of the time. I played the 345. Mike played the Telecaster. This was pre-Cream, so I still had the Rickenbacker 12 string, and poor Larry had to play the 12 string. Larry and I had become buddies about a year or so before, and it's just not his thing. And I get it. It wasn't really my thing either. And he went, I remember, I really can play the guitar. And I'm going, it's okay, buddy. And I feel your pain.
Wow. Yeah, I can't hear Larry playing a 12 string. But...
I can't hear me playing a 12 string.
Well, I could hear you like playing some nice chords and,
right.
I mean,
I remember I had a Martin D18 12 string, back in the 70s. I got it from somebody, and I used it to write songs on. I kind of wish I had it back. It was nice because it was a great guitar to write songs on.
Yeah. I mean, I love hearing blues when Robert Jr. Lockwood played his 12 string.
Ooh, that's a whole other, we had him twice and he played his 12 string thing. That's a different ball game altogether.
Yeah, that's heavy. Check that out, people. If you're not familiar with Robert. And he lived in Ohio. He lived in Cleveland.
Yeah, he lived in Cleveland, and can we swear on this podcast?
Fuck yeah.
Okay, well then good. I got two great Robert Jr. Lockwood stories. I mean, first of all, he was Robert Jr. Lockwood. And so to meet him, it was just so fucking cool, and he really was cool too. And so he did a show before we had our theater. We used to do the show in this little workshop you saw when we were at the Ranch. And he did that, and he was awesome. And I went up to him afterward and I went, Mr., because he was in his 80s, he was like probably in his mid 80s back then. Mr. Lockwood, you're basically, how do you keep it going, brother? And he went, well, he said, never did none of that cocaine, that heroin. He said, did some of that smoke. It did something to me. Didn't like it. And then he says, like to have a little taste every now and then. He says, and I don't eat no pussy. So I went, so that's your secret. So then the next time we had him, we had the theater, and he came down with his wife, and he put on a fantastic show. and he's coming off the stage, and this gal in the audience goes up to him and goes, "Mr. Lockwood, you were wonderful, and you don't even use a cane." He goes, "What the fuck do I need a cane for?"
Yeah. Yeah, I played the Chicago Blues Festival with them in 1993, and I'd never played with him before, and it was on the main stage. It was like a big blues review, and I was intimidated by him, but he made things very easy. It was totally cool.
Yeah, he was an immensely cool guy, and yeah, I guess the stuff that he did up in Cleveland, unfortunately, it's one of those things. Yeah, I should have gone up to Cleveland and seen that show. Because I think he was playing regularly at some club up there. It was a lot more jazz oriented. I mean, he was a heavy cat in a lot of ways.
Yeah, very, and a huge part of the chess sound.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, mostly as a sideman, backing up Sonny Boy and Little Walter.
Sure.
Can you tell us some memories about Jimi Hendrix?
So mine are really sort of like anecdotal. Jack knew Jimmy pretty well because he played on his stuff. But what I remember about Jimmy, I met him at the Monterey Pop Festival. First of all, again, a lot of the stuff aside from the brilliance that Jimmy had as a musician and the way he handled, the music, the stuff he did with the guitar, none of us had ever seen anything like that before.
Yeah.
So that was a whole new, holy mackerel, what's going on kind of thing,
Mm-hmm.
And so we socialized a little bit at Monterey, but I remember that when he spent some time in San Francisco, and so there were a bunch of jam sessions. Graham owned a building next to the Fillmore, and a lot of times the people that were working in town after the show would just go over there and play. So we got to hang and play with them a little bit. Bloomfield was around. There were just all kinds of people. There's a lot of action going on. And what I remember about him, because I can't say that he was a buddy and stuff like that, but he was just a really nice guy.
Mm-hmm.
It's so easy to get submerged in his stage persona, which is very powerful, no question about it. But as just a guy with a guitar, he was just a really nice guy that could play really good.
Yeah. Was the buzz that, it still is now, but back then, was it like we've never heard anything or seen anything?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Because nobody had heard anything like it back then, yeah.
Yeah. Who on today's scene excites you? Have you heard live or on record?
Wow. Interestingly enough, I probably don't listen to enough modern electric music, so I'm honestly not tuned into that anymore. I really live in the past with a lot of that stuff. And you and I have talked about this. One of the guys to me it's just like engraved in platinum was Buddy Guy's stuff back in the 60s, and God bless him, he's still powerful today. But you talk about how innovative in terms of sonic textures that a guy like Jimi Hendrix was, but let's not forget Buddy Guy.
Yeah.
So, he did stuff in the trio format back then, and he was capable of kicking the rest of his band off the stage and just playing solo. That's right up there with all that stuff.
Wow. Yeah. And it's interesting because Jimmy said that Buddy was one of his big influences.
Oh, that doesn't surprise me.
I wanted to ask you back to Bloomfield.
Yeah.
I'd heard that he was a big reason that Bill Graham started bringing in a lot of blues acts, maybe especially from Chicago.
Right.
Does that make sense to you?
Yeah. Well, Bill and I, I'm Jewish, as you know, but Bill and I never talked about our Jewishness, but it was there. And I suspect that might have been one of the bonds that he had with Bloomfield. I don't know. I'm totally speculating. As you mentioned earlier in our chat, Michael was an opinionated guy. And so I'm sure he was ready there to offer Graham his insights into what he should bring. And Graham, who was a very smart guy, I think immediately tuned into the fact that Michael had his finger on a pulse that Bill did not. And so there's a lot of guys I'm sure that Bill got was a direct result of Mike Bloomfield. I have no doubt about that.
That's cool. I mean, one of the things that I think about a lot as a professional blues player who plays out live quite a bit, is the fact that our audience is generally very much an older audience, and I rarely find myself at festivals or clubs
Yeah.
playing for like many people at all, like under 50. And I think about, I mean, I wasn't there, but talk about like the like if Buddy Guy came out and played the Fillmore, the
Sure.
average age in the audience was probably what, 19, 20?
Probably, yeah. So for whatever reason, and I'm sure some guys writing a book about that, they probably already did. So for whatever reason, you know, especially in San Francisco, but I think nationwide also. I mean, like, first of all, to back up a little bit, for me coming up, you know, there weren't a lot of blues bands that came through DC in those days. There was a lot of rock and roll and country music and stuff like that. But me and my buddies, we had all those chess records. We'd listen to all that stuff, and that's the stuff we loved, you know. So as we got a little older, and you know, and as our world expanded, and we actually got a chance to meet those people, that was the shit, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, that was so inspirational, and so you know, like when any of those your Chicago guys came to town, it was like the heavens had opened. We were surrounded by angels. I'm seriously. So, and I think that the audience back then, whether they played or not, felt had sort of walked the same path in some ways.
Yeah.
Today's kids don't walk the same path. Excuse me. And I'm not sure. I don't know. I mean, listen, we could, you know, opinions are like assholes. Everybody's got one, you know, and mine's more valid than anybody else's. But it's just that, you know, back in those days, you know, that stuff that influenced us as kids, then to get to see it live. And then as the younger guys my age and stuff like that, began to actually learn how to play some of that stuff, it was like, yeah, okay, this is what I want to do. This is what I want to be. Now, you know me, blues is certainly a huge part of my life, but I'm not a traditional blues musician, generally speaking, except
Yeah.
maybe when I play some acoustic guitar, stuff like that. But I mean, it's just like the blues, to get back to what you were saying, that blues, it was part of our world, you know, whether it was the older guys playing or whether it was us. Now, a lot of the younger audiences today are not tuned in the same way, you
Yeah.
know, and a lot of them would have to go back and listen to again the masters, you know, to see what the heck's going on. I mean, look, again, I know I'm going to catch flack for this, but I'm going to get into it anyway. A lot of the stuff that happened with blues playing over the guitar playing in general, but is just a lot of this really technical kind of stuff. And again, guys, I'm not, if you play better than me, I'm not critical of you. It's okay. But to me, that's not what blues is about. It's not about technique. There's something else. I mean, you need to know how to play, but there's that communication of the soul, you know, and a lot of that stuff is just not my thing. Simple as that, you know? And so I think that for a younger blues guy to touch me, this opinionated old guy, he would have to walk some of the paths that I've walked.
Yeah.
So I could understand his language, you know?
I hear you.
I know
Makes
the kids, I'm sure the kids don't give a shit about what I think about that, but you know what I mean? So, I mean, you know, a lot of our stuff is just etched in our time. That's just how it is.
Yeah.
And again, you know, when me and my guys go out and play, our demography is probably even older than yours because they were there. I mean, a part of our thing is, hey man, I was there. I remember when, et cetera, et cetera. But every now and then, you know, you play something and there's some much younger guys and gals in the audiences that play. Like we did a New Year's show, not this past New Year's, but the last New Year's out in San Francisco. And we had a little meet and greet afterwards, and there was a gaggle of, I'd say, kids in their late teens, maybe early 20s, both guys and girls. They all played, and they say there's no, because we did an electric show. There's nobody out there doing what you guys are doing today.
Yeah.
And I went, wow, that touched me. I said, you guys are really, you guys are inspirational to us. I went, wow, that's cool. So
Yeah.
it's cool. It's
Great.
kind of like the way I felt about, you know, the masters, you know?
Yeah, that's great. I wanted to ask you about your relationship with Jerry Garcia. I know
Sure.
he was one of the first guys you met when you moved out from DC to the Bay Area, and there's some stories in your book about him.
Sure.
And I was wondering if you could share a couple.
Sure.
I mean, his world was so deep. He drew from so many sources.
Totally.
I mean, I,
Yeah,
I go back and read Dylan's remembrance of Jerry after he passed on, and that kind of
sure.
says it all.
Yeah.
Um, Talk about Jerry if you wouldn't mind.
Sure. So when I moved to California in '62, um, Jerry was one of the very first people I met in the musical scene was Janis Joplin and a blues guy named Richmond Talbot. And I met Jerry around the same time too. Well, one of the things that was really touching about him, I remember he was married at the time and had a kid, and so even though I think he might even be a little, we're sort of we're the same age. That immediately made him like a grown up, you know. So there was that there was that aspect to him. But the thing is that he just loved the music so much. And at that time he had all kinds of stuff going on, like he had Mother McCree's Uptown Jug Stompers, Pig played in the band, he had the jug band. He'd been playing bluegrass with Sandy Rothman. He'd been doing all this stuff. I mean, and he'd also been out in the world and done stuff. So he had like a maturity um, with the music and the art that was beyond what I mean, I was still like a college kid and stuff like that. I'd only been finger picking when I moved to California in '62. I'd only been finger picking guitar for 2 years, you
Mhm.
know? So, but again, he was a very welcoming soul. You know, there wasn't a lot of swing and dick stuff and stuff like that. He was just a really good guy. And so, and we really hit it off. Now, as I mentioned, I think I mentioned it in this light in the book. He lived in Palo Alto. I lived in Santa Clara, or San Jose, and if you didn't have a car, 20 miles was a long way not to go. You know, unless
Yeah.
you wanted to take a Greyhound or something. And so we didn't get to hang out that much. I mean, he had his little fiefdom at the Dana Morgan Music Company where he taught, and I was at the Benner Music Company where me and all the San Jose guys taught. But the thing about him is that he was such a warm guy with the music. You know, it was always a conversation with him when you played with him. He always
Yeah.
wanted to play with you, not at you. You know,
Yeah.
and
Wow.
and that was, and I'll just never forget that. You know, and a lot of that, those kind of contacts and conversations that we had back then. Once we all had careers, there just wasn't as much time for that kind of stuff. But in the beginning, it was there all the time, and it's, you know, he was a cool guy. And one of the stories that I tell, because it moved me in a way, was 4 or 5 years ago there was a thing called Dear Jerry at Meriwether Post in Maryland, and they got a lot of artists, and we all did a Jerry song or something like that.
Yeah.
And they had an interview with all the artists, and the question for all of us was, if you could write a letter to Jerry, what would you say to him? And I said, I bet you wish you were here.
Yeah. 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 His passion for playing is
Totally.
so apparent. I think you're still playing some Jerry tunes, some Dead tunes.
Yeah, every now and then. Like I just about a year ago now, Phil Lesh invited me to do a 2-day show with him at the Capitol Theater in Portchester. It's funny stuff because I was part of an album that he did in the late '90s. We rehearsed for 10 days for that. For this show, he didn't even tell me the songs we were going to play until 2 days before the show, because he just wanted to let me be me. Now, fortunately, he had his son Graham was playing guitar. Great guitar
Yeah.
player. That guy, he's the shit. And
Yeah.
John Molo playing drums, and Rob Baracco, the keyboard player, is an old friend of mine. So there was a lot of handhelding and stuff. But you know, the Grateful Dead stuff is not lightly undertaken. It's not like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, I think I'll learn to play Saint Stephen or something like that. It's like, you know, if you're really going to do it, it takes a lot of rehearsal. But he didn't want me to do that. So a lot of hand holding. I had some charts, and they just let me solo. It was a lot of fun.
Cool. Yeah, I saw Phil in the Terrapin Family Band not too long ago.
Yeah.
And it was just a wonderful show.
Yeah,
Very
they're good. It's really good stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. So during the shutdown, the quarantine, have you been inspired to do a lot of playing, a lot of writing? I mean, I know you're doing the
Sure.
Saturday shows.
Well, you know, honestly, I've not done any writing, although I'm always taking notes and recording snippets for things to do. But yeah, what I have done is my goal with our quarantine shows is not to repeat any songs. So
Mhm.
we've got our 8th weekend coming up, and I'm still not. I repeated Water Song one time because I forgot, but other than that, uh, I've been keeping careful notes, and so I've been going back to stuff that I haven't played in decades and resuscitating it. And I'll tell you something that, one of the things that I just resuscitated this blues songs that I did called Broken Highway that I wrote a long time ago. And I'd listened to it for years, and I listened to it and go, man, it's got some weird ass thing in it. So mean, nothing new there yet. But then, I mean, where did that come from? That's worth doing the
That's
song just for that alone.
yeah, I like that. Is that a J45, Yorma?
Oh, so check this out. This is made by this guy David Fleming in Green, Iowa.
Oh
It's a
wow.
J35 clone.
Okay.
And we had a guy. He's really, I'm going to do a quick David Fleming commercial. So he's building just beautiful replica Gibson guitars. One of the guys came to the ranch last year and had one of these. I played it, and it was like when my J50 was new. They're really great guitars. I bought 2 of them. I got 2 of them.
Wow.
I've got one with heavy gauge strings on it, and this has 12s.
Cool.
It's
How do you spell his last name?
Flammang. Go to his website, check out his stuff. And he's,
Cool.
Guitar builders, they're such lovable geeks anyway. So he goes, so this is supposed to, it's a 1936 replica. So he goes, well, back in those days in Kalamazoo, there's a lot of artists, a lot of guys were building guitars. And so in any given month, a J35 could have been built by, there could have been 5 different people building a J35, and each one could be a little different because they're experimenting all the time. So the tone bars might be different and this and that. So I don't know which week he would copy this after, but each one's a little bit different. And I'll tell you what, like I said, when I told him, when I picked up that J35 that the kid brought down here one time, it's as close to feeling young again as I'm ever going to feel. It felt like my J50 when it was new.
Wow, that's great. And you have a signature Martin M30.
The M30. I do. And and of course, guys. Well, now that you're playing that, are you going to sell your Martins? No, absolutely not.
Yeah.
I love my signature Martin, but the Martin's a long scale guitar, and the Gibson that I played for so many years growing up is a shorter scale guitar.
Yeah.
So I did this instrumental thing I wrote called Man's Fate a couple of weeks ago, because I was playing my original J35. I've been playing that for a lot of stuff. It was written on it, and just because the frets are closer together, it's easier to play. It's really hard to play on one of my Martins, but there's other stuff that's better on them.
Cool. Let me just take a second to thank our sponsors for the podcast.
Awesome.
Chicago Blues Camp, where I'm also a teacher. Check us out at athomechicagoblues.com. I'd also like to thank ChicagoBluesGuide.com, a great site for checking out the latest news on the Chicago scene, and the Trinidadeo Blues Festival down in southern Colorado in the Four Corners area. Unfortunately, as most festivals have been canceled, theirs has been 2 this year, but they'll be back up and running next summer. So thanks to all our sponsors. And Yorm, I just want to say thanks so much. This has been great.
Hey, listen, man, it's been great talking to you. And at some point we got to get you to come down and teach for us. And there's music out there waiting for all of us, both players and audience alike. And
and I hope you and Jack and your solo stuff is back on the road. Hopefully, maybe end of the year or next year. I know you had your 50th anniversary tour with Hot Tuna.
Yeah.
And I saw you guys in Chicago at the Park West. That was a killer show.
That was a fun show.
Yeah.
I look at we look at what's been going on with this quarantine and the virus and all this stuff, and and for guys like me, you know, because by the grace of God, I'm well and stuff like that, it could have been worse for us, you know. I'm out of work, as you know,
Yeah.
but, you know, at least I'm alive and kicking. And at some point, you know, I had this idea. I said, you know, we could be playing drive-in movies and stuff. And then, of course, one of the country guys, the guy that's married to Nicole Kidman, I can't think of his name right now. Anyway, did a country show and a drive-in movie. Hey, then we'll figure it out. We'll do something.
Yeah. Well, can't wait till we all get back out on stage and
Yeah, man.
keep on keeping on, Yorma. Thanks again. Say hi to
My
the
best, brother.
All right. So long.
Thanks, Dave. Good
Bye-bye.
seeing you.
Great seeing you.
Yeah.
Again. Bye-bye.